Well, this morning we're going to be looking at the second in our series of encounters with Jesus. And we'll be looking at the story from Luke 8 that we had heard read a little earlier about the sick woman and Jairus' daughter. And the purpose of this series, this Encounters with Jesus series, is to look at people who personally met Jesus and the faith that they displayed in him. But before we start today, I want to quickly ask that question, what is faith? If we're looking at the faith of these people, then what do we mean by faith? Well, faith, if you look up its simple definition, is the complete trust or confidence in something or someone. So when we say faith in Christianity, we're talking about faith, trust, complete confidence in God. I think if you took a poll around people, if you took a census of what people thought faith was, then most people would consider faith as the exact opposite of reason. And that comes from the idea that reason is based on evidence or science, whereas faith is based on nothing and is just merely a pipe dream. Particularly when it comes to God, people would say that because they say, I can't see God, or I can't touch God or feel God, so how can I have complete confidence in him? Well, faith being the opposite of reason just simply isn't true. You see, the Bible cares a lot about evidence. And the very linchpin of Christianity, the very core of Christianity, is based on the belief that God stepped into history through the person of Jesus Christ, that Jesus died and that he rose again. And the New Testament is the evidence for that belief, written by people who knew Jesus. And that evidence of the New Testament includes eyewitness accounts that we call the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. And we're looking at one of these stories that is included in an eyewitness account where real faith is displayed today. And this story that we're looking at is in fact included in 3 of the 4 Gospels. So as we look at this woman's faith, we're going to be challenged as to whether we have real faith in Jesus and what it looks like to have that faith in him. Well, we heard the story read earlier by Pat, but let's just have a quick recap of what happened. In this story, we see a miracle within a miracle. The first person that Jesus meets is Jairus, who has a sick daughter. And Jairus has come to Jesus to ask him to heal his daughter, ask Jesus to heal his daughter. Jesus agrees to that request, and they begin to head off towards Jairus' house through this large crowd. Jesus was following Jairus, no doubt, on the way to his house with his disciples in tow. But on the way, this interruption occurs. They get delayed. And can you just imagine Jairus at that point, sick daughter at home, thinks Jesus, the healer, is on his way, and then all of a sudden we have this pause in their journey. Jairus, I think, must have been jumping up and down and getting pretty impatient. And if you were with us for the first of this series, then we looked at the centurion's servant being healed. And Jairus has no reason really to be impatient with Jesus because Jesus has healed someone who's dying before, and Jesus did at that time at a distance. It raised a question for me. Why didn't Jesus just say to Jairus, go on home, like he said to that centurion? Go on home and your daughter will be better. And I think the reason is because had he have said that, Jesus would have once again proved his power over people who are sick and dying. But instead, as we see at the end of this story, the daughter does die. But Jesus carries on to the house and brings the girl back from the dead, displaying that not only does he have power over the sickness and over people who are dying, but he has power over death as well, something that he'll ultimately show in his own resurrection as well. Well, now we're going to move on to the miracle that we're going to focus on today. We're going to put Jairus and his daughter to one side now. We're going to focus on the miracle that happens in the middle of that miracle. The miracle of the healing of the sick woman. So just picture this for a moment. Jesus is pushing through this crowd, following Jairus on his way to his house. And there would have been so many people in that crowd jostling and bumping into each other, trying to get closer and a better look at Jesus. And then this sick woman appears on the scene. She's been bleeding for 12 years. We don't know the exact cause. Luke doesn't tell us that. But the original word just means that there's a flow of blood or hemorrhage. And many think that it's probably something like a uterine prolapse. But anyway, she pushes her way through the crowd and she manages to get close enough to stretch out her hand and just touch the hem of Jesus' coat. And immediately she is completely and utterly healed. And Jesus recognizes, he feels and senses that power has just gone out of him. So he stops and he asks a simple question: who touched me? Well, you know in a crowd, don't you, that if you're in that busy a crowd, then there's lots of people touching you. So the disciples have the reaction that many of us would have. What are you talking about, Jesus? So many people are touching you. What are you on about? But Jesus knows something special has happened. And the healed woman at that point could have just slipped back through the crowd and disappeared. But instead she stands up and admits to Jesus it was her who had touched him in that special way. And then we see Jesus and this woman having this dialogue, this conversation, where she admits in front of everyone why she touched Jesus, and then the fact that she's been healed. And Jesus calls her his daughter and says it's by her faith that she's healed. So as we look at a bit more detail at this story now, I want us to do it through 3 stages. First, we're going to look at the problems that this woman had. Then secondly, we're going to look at the faith that she displayed. And then finally, we're going to look at her witness to those around her. So let's start with her problems. And I say problems because although initially we think it's only one problem that she's bleeding, actually she has 3. The obvious one is that she's bleeding, and she has been for 12 years. It's a physical problem that no doubt has left her very weak and in immense pain. If you've ever suffered personally from an issue that is chronic but medically non-urgent, then you know that it brings a person to a place of utter hopelessness. They feel after a while like they will never be well again, that they will never be whole again in that sense. They're utterly hopeless. But then not only was it a physical problem for her, but it also would have been a societal problem. Within that Jewish culture, she would have been utterly isolated. I think firstly because she would have struggled to get out of the house. One, because she was bleeding, but also the embarrassment of that bleeding. She wouldn't have been allowed, even if she could have got out of the house, to mingle in Jewish society. And thirdly, she certainly wouldn't have been allowed into the temple because the Jews would have considered her unclean as a result of this bleeding. So not only was she separated from humans, from her people, but she also in that sense was separated from God by her inability to go in to the temple to worship God. And then thirdly, her third problem was that she was poor. Luke doesn't record it here, but in the other accounts it tells us that this woman has spent all of her money trying to get better. She's seen doctors and no doubt spent some money on a few natural remedies, but to no success or avail, and now she was financially poor as well. Let's bring that into a slight modern day context if we can to help us understand it. Essentially, this is a person who's got a chronic condition. So they go to their GP for help. The GP can't do anything, so they refer them to the hospital, to a consultant there. The consultant does everything they can, but still the condition continues. The person heads home dismayed and disgruntled and maybe disappointed, and starts Googling online to find any cures out there. They find a few and they start investing their money on buying maybe some natural products and some herbal remedies, but again to no avail. So they take the final step and they step into the realms of private healthcare. They work their way through the private healthcare system, paying for appointments and tests and scans. They see the specialists and the best of the best in the country and spend all the money they have, but yet still to no avail. They still have the same chronic condition as they started with, but now they just have no money either. So to sum up her problem and her position, it's that she's defiled, she's destitute, she's discouraged and desperate, living on the outside of her community, looking in at others who are living and receiving blessings in their lives. But she comes to Jesus and she has her need met. So secondly then, the faith of this woman. This woman has tried everything to get better, and not a single thing has worked for her. She must have thought, mustn't she, that she'd never get better, that this was it for the rest of her life, bleeding and no solution. Then along comes Jesus. Jesus enters the town that she lives in. Along comes Jesus, the man who has healed a dying servant, who has freed people from demon possession. And she must have thought, this is my last chance, my final ditch attempt to be healed. And we don't know, do we, whether this was an act of inspiration or an act of desperation on this woman's part. But she must have thought, I've got nothing to lose, so I might as well try. This man, Jesus, is an amazing healer. He's shown that in the past, so maybe he can heal me as well. But she doesn't want to be noticed. So she sneaks up through the crowd, and from behind Jesus, she just reaches out and touches the hem of his coat. But she's allowed nothing to get in her way, has she? I mentioned that she was an outsider. She would have been isolated. And her status as an isolated outsider, doesn't stop her from coming into a large crowd. The thought that Jesus is in the middle of dealing with important Jairus and his problem doesn't stop her either. She doesn't think, oh, Jesus at the moment won't have time for little old me. You see, we don't even know her name. We never learn this woman's name. But she doesn't let that stop her. And the crowd doesn't stop her either. I wonder whether you've ever been trying to get somewhere on your way somewhere. And there's been a big crowd that you've had to try and work your way through to get to your destination. But as you're doing it, you get buffeted sideways, left and right, and it feels like it's one step forward for every 3 backwards. But the crowd doesn't stop her. She pushes and squeezes her way through until she can just touch his coattail. And the result of touching that hem of Jesus' coat is that she's immediately and completely healed. That woman knew that she didn't need to speak to Jesus. She didn't need to have Jesus touch her. She didn't need to have Jesus give her some remedy or cure to take home to be healed later. She simply knew that she just had to touch Jesus and even just touch the coat that he's wearing. That's the awesome power of Jesus. And Jesus reveals for us why she was healed. He tells us that it was because of her faith that she's been healed. She trusted that Jesus had the power to heal her. And in response to that trust and that faith, Jesus acted and healed her. Jesus says elsewhere that all we need to have is childlike faith. And if you've got kids, then you begin to understand what that means. One thing that Isaac currently quite likes doing, if he's coming down the stairs and I'm around, is to stand 5 or 6 stairs up. And much to the dismay and horror of Esther, he likes to jump off of that step and have me catch him. See, for Isaac, the thought hasn't even entered his mind that I won't catch him. It hasn't even entered his mind that I might drop him or he might get hurt in the process. He puts his faith, his confidence, his total trust in me that I will catch him like I have done every other time, and jumps. And in the same way, that woman puts her trust, her faith in Jesus and stretches out her hand and touches the hem of Jesus' coat, and she's healed. That's faith in action. And I wonder what's stopping you from coming to Jesus. What's stopping you from putting your faith and trust in Jesus? Maybe it's your reputation or status. Maybe it's you think that Jesus won't care or have time for you. Or maybe it's your crowd, your friends and your family, and you're worried what they'll say to you when you tell them that you've now put your trust in Jesus. Well, let me tell you this morning that none of those are reasons not to come to Jesus. Status? Jesus doesn't care. If you just look through the beginning of Acts, another book in the New Testament, you'll see people of all walks of life coming to faith. Beggars, wealthy people, magicians, God-haters even. We've been looking at one of those this morning, Paul, a God-hater, but he comes to faith. Jesus doesn't care about status. Or look who Jesus chooses as his disciples. Not the wealthy and educated, but the humble fisherman. Jesus doesn't mind if you're rich or poor, educated or uneducated, well-dressed or living in rags. He loves you just the same. So then finally, let's look at the witness that this woman had. We've seen her problems, and we've seen that in faith she reaches out and touches Jesus and is completely healed. Jesus realizes what's happened and asks who it was in order to give her a chance to publicly bear witness to what Jesus has done for her and to confess Christ and to glorify God. Jesus asks that simple question, who has touched me? And so many people were touching him at the time. But Jesus already knew that woman. He knew she was listening. He's seen her pain. And because he's God, he has seen her since before she was even born. He already knows and loves that woman. And Jesus wants her to know why she's been healed. He wants her to know that it's not magic that's happened. It's not a magic coat that he's wearing. And it's not superstition that has made this healing happen. But it's the power of Jesus. As soon as she was healed, whilst Jesus was asking who it was, that woman could have snuck back away through the crowd and we would have never have known who she was. But had she have done that, she would never have met Jesus personally either, or heard those words of assurance and comfort when he calls her daughter and tells of her faith. See, the power of Jesus is not a power that saves through impersonal power, but it's a personal relational power that needs to touch each of us. Faith in Jesus and his power to save involves a relationship with him, not just a one-off touch. And that relationship is personal and it's lifetime and it's lifelong and it's intimate. And when through it we talk with Jesus and we commune with Jesus. It's not just a one-off moment. And I think from her witness we can draw out three things. Firstly, it's that her witness would have encouraged Jairus. Remember him? The dad of the dying girl who stood there observing this, probably getting more and more impatient, wishing Jesus would just hurry up and come and sort out his need, to heal his sick daughter. But hearing that confession of the power of Jesus healing a woman who had been sick for 12 years would have given Jairus encouragement and confidence when he heard that his daughter was dead, that Jesus was about to display even greater power in defying death and bringing his daughter back. So it would have encouraged Jairus to see the power that Jesus has, that just in touching his cloak he has power, so how much more when Jesus speaks. Secondly, her witness would have rebuked the crowd. When it comes to following Jesus, it's no good to just be one member or part of the crowd. Jesus isn't a celebrity with a mass following. I don't know if you've ever seen it when people hear that a big celebrity is coming into town. All of a sudden people flock out of their houses and line the streets and are craning their neck just to get a glimpse of a celebrity who's coming. Well, Jesus isn't interested in those kind of followers. He's a personal God who wants people to be in a personal relationship with him. People who know him intimately, not just follow him for the glory moments. It's one thing to press or bump into Jesus, or to put it another way, to rub shoulders with him. But it's another thing to touch him by faith like this woman did. To touch him by faith has life-changing consequences. For this woman, it healed her of her need from that physical issue of bleeding. But for others of us, it heals us of our greatest need to be forgiven of our sin. And then finally, her witness shows that we don't need a strong faith. And we don't need a strong faith because we have a strong Saviour who responds to the touch of the hem of his garment. The woman's faith at this stage wasn't perfect. She didn't fully understand who Jesus was. And in some ways, maybe she even reached out in mere desperation to be healed from this bleeding. But even this imperfect faith that she shows, and the imperfect faith that we can show, can lead us to a genuine love for Jesus that matures and grows over the weeks and months and years of having faith in Jesus. You see, it's not about us having a perfect faith and trust in Jesus, but it's about a perfect Jesus who saves us. And all we need to do to be saved is to touch his coattails. I want to give you an illustration. There was the inventor of chloroform back in the 1800s, Sir James Simpson. As he was dying, a friend said to him, "You'll soon be resting on the bosom of Jesus." Simpson humbly replied to that friend, "I don't know as I can do that, but I think I have hold of the hem of his garment." Simpson got it. Simpson got that he didn't need to have a perfect faith or a perfect understanding of Jesus, but he simply needed just to have hold of the hem of Jesus' garment, because that is enough for the power of Jesus to work in your life. To be saved, that's all you need, a simple faith in Jesus. The woman's faith causes her to press through the crowd and touch the hem of Jesus' robe and then publicly acknowledge the saving power of Jesus. Maybe today you're in a desperate situation as this woman was. Maybe for you it's not health, maybe it's family issues or financial problems. You're at the end of your rope and you have no hope of ever getting back. Well, Jesus is still there. Jesus is always there. And he still has the power to change your life like he changed the life of this woman. Because Jesus cares about everyone. No matter your past, no matter your status, no matter your education, Jesus wants you to stretch out your arm to him so he can powerfully work in your life too. This story shows us that Jesus is always approachable, that he's never in a hurry, that he's compassionate and never daunted by any situation or circumstance. So do not fear Jesus today, only believe. And I'm going to finish with this question: will you stretch out your hand for Jesus today?